down. Josh down there, Rennie's at the controls there, Casey, Alan, Jake, and Tyler, right? Okay, Brad is around here somewhere, I think. Okay, as I said, this is called the William Corliss engine. Let's talk a little bit about the history of it so you understand why would any company purchase such an engine. Back in 1904, there was a company that built wooden boxes in St. Paul, Minnesota, down near the river. And you can understand that the Ham's Beer Company is down in that area too. And what do you ship beer bottles in? Wooden cases, right? As a matter of fact, you've seen these little cheese boxes, these wooden cheese boxes. Okay, why is it that everything was in wood? Could it be they didn't have cardboard in 1904? Could be, right? They're a big business. In addition to that business of beer cases and so on, they also made windows, sashes, and doors, and all that other stuff, you know? But this might be the contract with Ham's Beer Company that catapulted them from being a wood shop into an industry, you might say. Okay, they had previously run their factory with a smaller version of this, but all the woodworking machines were run off of jack shafts. And you've seen pictures of these, and there's pictures over there where the jack shaft runs the length of the factory, and all these belts come down for every various machine. And if you look at those pictures, you can see when you're working with wood, you got sawdust, scrap, and everything that is just piled around the machine. Ocean would die if they saw something like that. And actually, they probably had a fair number of accidents because of that. Now, in addition to that, they had a problem. St. Paul, Minnesota did not have any commercial electric power. When they heard that you could do electric light bulbs and so on, because that started in the late 80s, like 1880, that electric lights came out, they realized that there's a real potential here. If you look at their factory, it is just loaded with windows. Why would they have all these windows in there? Well, it makes sense to me. They needed light to work by. Now, in a factory that's full of sawdust and wood, I don't think you're going to use kerosene lanterns to give you light. So they probably had a sunrise to sunset business going. So first of all, electric power was attractive for electric lighting. Secondly, you can replace all those jack shafts with electric motors. And that was their intention when they bought this machine in 1904. We can eliminate all the jack shafts and we can have lights. And that was very important. In 1904, they purchased this machine to replace their smaller machine that ran the jack shafts. It is a 380 horsepower Corliss steam engine coupled with a 200 kilowatt Alice-Chalmers generator. They installed it in the factory, and within 7 years, they had completely switched over. I'm sure that this is one of the things that made them a viable industry that still is in operation today, 130 years later, except they relocated down in Eagan, Minnesota. Talk about luck, though. You know, you talk about providence sometimes. Try and figure this one out. In 1904, this went online. In 1952, they had a giant flood in St. Paul. Flooded the whole river level, including their factory. This was the impetus for them shortly after that to say, you know what, we've had a really good run with this machine. Commercial power was available for many, many years, never had to hook up, but it's time now for us to do it. In the middle 1950s, they retired this machine. It was in a room that approximates this red foundation here, and this railing approximates the wall. A small clean room. Literally all they did was oil it down, shut the door, put a tarp over it, and they kind of forgot about it. In 1970, which is not that much years later, people from our organization did what they called smokestack chasing. that is, if you want to find a steam engine, you need a boiler. And if you got a boiler, you need a smokestack, right? So they look for the smokestack. And sure enough, if you stand on the bluffs overlooking the river level in St. Paul, you can see the whole area down there. They spotted a smokestack and they decide, let's go and investigate. When they investigated, they found that St. Paul had ordered a redevelopment of the whole area to clear it off the floodplain, and that building was ready to be demolished. The president just happened to be there moving the office to their new location, and they asked him about it. He was ecstatic that the engine would be preserved. This engine had been a Cadillac in its day when they bought it, and he wanted it preserved. He had even gone to the St. Paul Historical Society seeking to preserve it. He was only glad, too glad, to give it to us, but of course you have to have the $1 transfer fee. Our people picked it up that same year, brought it up, built the exact foundation that the original plans called for, and in the next year, 1972, we had it on display already. It's been running wonderfully ever since the last 40-some years. So that's a little bit of the background there, why they would buy it and so on. Now, what about the beauty of this particular steam engine? Let's first of all talk about how does a steam engine work? Everybody got a handle on that or no? Let's talk about it for a minute. Steam pushes both ways. What that means is you have to have a way on both sides of the cylinder to put steam in. These are the intake valves. The bottom two are the exhaust valves. There is a slot cut in the top of both ends of the cylinder about this big on the top and the bottom. Let's go through a cycle. The governor tells the intake valve to open. When the governor opens the intake valve, this hook comes up, the valve opens up. Now we have a slot that opens up about this big to admit steam into the steam chest. The piston starts to be pushed down this end. Whatever steam is left on the other side of the piston is pushed out the exhaust port, which is open at the same time. Then once the piston gets to the other end, this wrist blade changes position. The intake valve opens on this side, the exhaust valve on this side, and pushes the piston back the other way. So we have now the beauty of steam. The beauty of steam is push, push, push. That's where the power comes all the time. Push, push, push. Slow speed, tremendous power. Corliss invented this system, which was a substantial improvement over the previous styles. All these steam traction engines out here that you see, they all have what they call slide valves on them. And that's a hole with a slide that goes out. You either open or close it. Steam in, stop. Steam in, stop. Okay. The problem is when you got a little tiny cylinder like this, like on those traction engines, it's easy. You don't have any problem getting that steam through that hole. Now, when you have a 20-inch piston with a 4-foot stroke, now you need lots of steam. You got to move a lot of steam in a short period of time with very little movement. And so what they did, they came up with this slot idea I've been talking about. So now, with a little bit of rotary movement, you can open a slot which will be like a huge hole. Steam just dumps into there very quickly. So you'll see these rotary valves, they just move a little bit, and that's all the action it takes to open and close this big opening for the steam to come in and out. The other thing that he found out, which was a problem, and that is making sure that the speed stays constant under a varying load. So every engine out there has a governor on it. The governor is based on the physics principle that if you have a rotating weight, the faster you spin it, the harder it pulls out. That's exactly what happens here. As the speed of the engine increases, eventually the outward thrust is so great that it overcomes that center weight there, which is calibrated for the governed speed of this engine. As it starts to overcome that weight, it tells the engine, hey, we're at speed, slow down. Via these two arms, it moves the timing of the intake valve so we emit less steam every governor, but that's the idea that was behind it. We have a few other interesting things here. Everybody asks us, what's that big thing up there? They have all kinds of ideas about what it is. What it is it's a water separator. The physics of steam says that if you push steam down a pipe, if you lose any of the temperature, some of that steam changes back to water. That's right. So the dry steam that we get from the boiler outside coming in the top there, that dry steam, as it makes its travel, starts to lose some temperature. We get droplets of water in there. We don't want water inside that cylinder if we can avoid it, right? So what they do is, understanding that water is heavier than steam, they run the steam through this steam separator in a circular fashion. Again, we have centrifugal force at work saying, throw the heavy water droplets out to the side and let them run down the side. Then we have dry steam then that comes down the middle through the throttle. What else can I say? Oh, yes. How do we know this is a Cadillac engine? Pretty simple, right? This engine was designed to be kind of maintenance-free. And you can tell because it's got a centralized oiling system. Up there is a central oil reservoir. These oil tubes that go to every single major bearing, and you can see little glasses on top. We control the drip rate of the oil. Those tubes are nickel plated, for heaven's sake. You know, who would nickel plate oil tubes except for somebody who's telling you a Cadillac, I guess. But the fact is that 109 years later, this steam engine is still running as good as it was when it was new. It's still fine shape. It was never abused. Like we said, it was properly stored for a few years. We've been taking care of it ever since. It's just a remarkable engine. You won't find engines like this. Most of them have been dismantled, thrown in the weeds, stored outside, and so on, and they've taken the abuse of time and weather. Not this one. This one's always been in good shape. So what you're seeing and hearing and experiencing when you see this work is exactly what that steam engineer heard when he opened the door and listened and said, is everything working right? Yeah, it sounds right. He looked at that oil level up there. If it was okay, shut the door. If it was down, he knew that all of these bearings here have a collection system underneath them because we've over-oiled all the Babbage bearings. Collect the oil, goes down to a central reservoir. Because the room was clean, a little bit of settling tank action down there, we can pump that oil right back up to the top again and use it over and over and over again. One other thing I just want to comment about the fact of how people were recyclers back then to a degree that we have little concept of today. Think about the fact that you have a wood industry with tons of wood scrap and no garbage problem because all you got to do is take that wood scrap, feed it back into the boiler, make it into steam, and make electric power for your factory. So anyway, they were very, very far-thinking, and maybe that attests to why they're in business today. The Ellis-Chalmers generator, little interesting. Just take a moment of your time to appreciate a couple things here. This engine is 380 horsepower. Look at the coupling size on this wheel. Try and understand the area that's in contact with the belt. Many square yards. Now we've got 300 horsepower coupled really nicely here. Look at how small that is over there. We still need to couple the same 380 horsepower. We only got maybe 2 square yards of belt. So they used a leather belt and a specially designed composite pulley that the leather would grip on very, very tightly and able to transfer this horsepower. We never got the belt. So we use a conveyor belt, and so we understand that slippage is the nature of the game for us at least. So we never really run it at any big power draw. The alternator is powered by an exciter generator. That's what's sticking off on the side. The exciter generator creates DC, which in turn we control to excite the field on the alternator, and we can control the output of the alternator.